What happens when a rising political star thinks she can corner one of Hollywood's most beloved spiritual figures on live television, only to discover she's walking straight into a divine trap? Well, you're about to witness something that nobody in the entertainment industry saw coming. And trust me, what Jonathan Roumie revealed in those final moments didn't just silence Jasmine Crockett, it sent shockwaves through every major network in America. This isn't just another political confrontation or celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the story of how a congresswoman's carefully planned ambush backfired so spectacularly that it exposed something far more dangerous than she ever intended. Something that powerful people in Washington have been desperately trying to keep hidden from the American people. Something that, once revealed, changes everything you think you know about the real battle being fought behind the scenes of our political system. Jasmine Crockett thought she was inviting just another actor onto her show, someone she could easily manipulate and use to advance her progressive agenda. She had no idea that Jonathan Roumie carries something far more powerful than any political weapon she's ever encountered. She had no idea that her questions would unleash a response so profound, so spiritually charged, that it would leave her completely defenseless on her own show. But here's what makes this story absolutely extraordinary. What Roumie said in those climactic moments wasn't just a defense of his faith. It was a warning. A prophetic warning that predicted exactly what would happen to those who continue down the path Crockett represents. And the most terrifying part? Everything he warned about is already starting to come true. The evidence is mounting, the signs are everywhere, and the people who witnessed this confrontation are now watching in amazement as his words prove to be devastatingly accurate. Make sure you stay until the very end of this story, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see both politics and faith forever. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this incredible journey is just getting started. It was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Jasmine Crockett, the sharp-tongued Texas congresswoman who had built her reputation on fearlessly taking on anyone who stood in the way of progressive change, had agreed to host Jonathan Roumie on her weekly political show. At first glance, it seemed like an odd pairing, a rising Democratic star known for her fiery speeches about social justice sitting across from the Catholic actor who had become America's most beloved portrayal of Jesus Christ in the hit series The Chosen. But Crockett's team saw an opportunity. Roumie had millions of devoted Christian followers, and if they could get him to endorse even a few progressive talking points, it would be a massive win for their cause. The congresswoman had done her homework on Roumie, studying his interviews and public appearances, looking for any crack in his spiritual armor that she could exploit. She was confident that, like most Hollywood actors, underneath all the religious talk, he would be just another liberal who could be easily swayed to support her agenda. The network executives were thrilled to have secured what they believed would be a ratings goldmine. Here was Jonathan Roumie, the man who had brought Jesus to life for millions of viewers around the world, sitting down with one of the most dynamic young voices in American politics. The promotional material practically wrote itself. Faith meets politics, tradition meets progress, a conversation that would surely generate headlines and social media buzz for weeks. Crockett's production team had carefully crafted their strategy. They would start with softball questions about The Chosen and Roumie's acting career, build rapport with the audience, and then gradually steer the conversation toward the real agenda. They had prepared talking points about how Jesus was actually a progressive figure, how true Christianity demanded social justice action, and how conservative Christians had hijacked the faith for political purposes. They were certain that once cornered with these arguments, Roumie would either agree with their perspective or at least avoid disagreeing too strongly on live television. What none of them realized was that they weren't just inviting an actor onto their show. They were inviting someone who had spent years not just playing Jesus, but genuinely walking in his footsteps. Someone whose faith wasn't a Hollywood costume that could be put on and taken off, but a living, breathing reality that had transformed every aspect of his life. Someone who understood the difference between political Christianity and the real, uncompromising truth of the gospel. And most importantly, someone who would never compromise that truth, no matter how cleverly the questions were designed or how intense the pressure became. If they had truly understood who they were dealing with, they might have thought twice about their strategy. But their overconfidence would prove to be their greatest weakness, and Jonathan Roumie was about to show them just how dangerous it can be to underestimate the power of authentic faith. From the moment Jonathan Roumie walked onto the set, something felt different. The actor moved with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with Hollywood swagger and everything to do with inner peace. He settled into the guest chair across from Crockett with the same gentle presence that had captivated millions of viewers in The Chosen, his eyes calm but alert, taking in everything around him with the careful attention of someone who understood that spiritual battles are often fought in the most unexpected places. "Welcome to the show, Jonathan." Crockett began with her practiced political smile, the same one she used when greeting voters back in Texas. "Thank you so much for joining us today. I have to say, The Chosen has really touched so many people across the country." "Thank you, Congresswoman," Roumie replied in his familiar warm voice, though there was something in his tone that suggested he was already sensing the undercurrents of the conversation to come. "It's been a tremendous blessing to be part of something that brings people closer to understanding who Jesus really was." The first few minutes proceeded exactly as Crockett's team had planned. She asked about his preparation for the role, about working with the cast and crew, about the impact the show had on audiences worldwide. Roumie answered each question thoughtfully, speaking about his craft with genuine humility and his faith with quiet conviction. To the casual viewer, it looked like a perfectly normal celebrity interview, the kind of safe, predictable television that morning shows are built on. But those who knew Jasmine Crockett could see the subtle signs that she was preparing to make her move. Her questions began to shift slightly, becoming more probing, more pointed. She started asking about the responsibility that came with portraying such an important religious figure, about whether he felt pressure to represent Jesus in a way that would be accessible to modern audiences. The words themselves seemed innocent enough, but anyone familiar with progressive political speak could recognize the loaded language, the carefully chosen phrases designed to lead somewhere specific. Roumie seemed to sense it too. His responses became more measured, more careful. When Crockett asked about making Jesus relevant to today's social issues, he paused for just a moment longer than necessary before answering. "Jesus is always relevant," he said quietly. "His message doesn't need to be updated or modernized. It's as true today as it was 2,000 years ago." There it was, the first crack in Crockett's carefully constructed plan. She had expected him to agree that Jesus's message needed contemporary interpretation, that it should be viewed through the lens of current social justice movements. Instead, she was getting someone who believed in absolute, unchanging truth. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop just a degree as both participants realized they weren't going to be having the conversation either of them had initially expected. The camera operators began to exchange glances, sensing the shift in energy even if they couldn't quite identify what was happening. The producers in the control room leaned forward in their chairs, suddenly more alert, more focused. This was supposed to be an easy interview, a ratings-friendly conversation between two likable public figures. Instead, it was beginning to feel like something much more significant was about to unfold. But what none of them realized was that this was just the beginning. The real confrontation, the moment that would change everything, was still to come. And when it arrived, it would reveal truths that would shake not just this television studio, but the very foundations of how America thinks about faith, politics, and the eternal battle between them. Stay tuned because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless, and make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because this incredible story is about to reach heights you never imagined possible. Jasmine Crockett decided it was time to drop the pretense. She leaned forward slightly, her politician's instincts telling her to press the advantage while she still had control of her own show. "Jonathan, you've spent so much time studying Jesus, and I think many people would agree that he was really the ultimate progressive figure. I mean, he stood up for the marginalized, he challenged the established power structures, he advocated for the poor and oppressed. Don't you think modern Christians have lost sight of that social justice message?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Roumie studied her for a moment, and those who knew him well might have recognized the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his posture straightened almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice carried a new weight, a quiet authority that seemed to fill the studio. "Congresswoman, Jesus absolutely cared for the poor and the marginalized. But his message was about spiritual transformation, not political revolution. He said his kingdom was not of this world. When people tried to make him a political leader, he walked away. Crockett's practiced smile flickered slightly. This wasn't going according to script. But surely you can see how his teachings align with progressive values? The call for economic equality, the criticism of religious hypocrisy, the emphasis on helping those in need. Jesus did call out religious hypocrisy, Roumie agreed, his voice growing stronger. But he wasn't calling for government programs or political solutions. He was calling for individual hearts to be transformed. He said, "Go and sin no more," not, "Society needs to be restructured." The change he demanded was personal, spiritual, and absolute. The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was clearly not the easy agreement they had expected to witness. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically whispering to each other, trying to decide whether this was television gold or a public relations disaster waiting to happen. Crockett's voice took on a sharper edge. "But Jonathan, with respect, isn't that exactly the kind of thinking that allows injustice to continue? When Christians focus only on personal salvation and ignore systemic problems, aren't they essentially enabling oppression?" "There's a difference," Roumie replied, his calm never wavering, "between ignoring problems and understanding that real change comes from transformed hearts, not changed laws. Jesus fed the hungry, but he also said, 'Man does not live by bread alone.' He healed the sick, but he said, 'What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul?' The physical needs mattered, but they weren't the ultimate solution." Crockett's political instincts were now fully engaged. She sensed resistance, and like any skilled politician, her response was to apply more pressure. That sounds like a very convenient way to avoid taking stands on difficult issues. What about racial justice? What about economic inequality? What about LGBTQ+ rights? Are you saying Christians should just pray about these things instead of fighting for change? The question was designed to corner him, to force him into either agreeing with progressive positions or appearing callous and uncaring. But Roumie didn't flinch. Instead, something remarkable happened. His entire demeanor seemed to shift, as if he was drawing on a source of strength that went far deeper than ordinary human confidence. "I'm saying," he replied, his voice now carrying the kind of moral authority that made everyone in the studio lean forward, "that Jesus Christ died for every single person in this room, regardless of their race, their background, or their struggles. His love is absolute and unconditional. But his truth is also absolute and unchanging. Real love doesn't tell people what they want to hear. Real love tells them what they need to hear, even when it's difficult." The tension in the room had become electric. Camera operators found themselves holding their breath. The producers in the control room were now fully alert, realizing that they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical celebrity interview. This was becoming a battle for the very soul of American Christianity, broadcast live to millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting light entertainment but were instead getting a masterclass in the difference between authentic faith and political manipulation. Something dangerous flickered in Jasmine Crockett's eyes. The careful politician's mask was beginning to slip, replaced by something much more raw and desperate. She had come too far to back down now, invested too much political capital in this confrontation to let it end without achieving her objective. Her voice took on a cutting edge that her constituents back in Texas would have recognized, the tone she used when she felt cornered and was preparing to fight her way out. "Jonathan, let's be honest here," she said, leaning back in her chair with the kind of calculated casualness that experienced politicians use when they're about to deliver a killing blow. "You talk about absolute truth and unchanging messages, but isn't that exactly the kind of rigid thinking that has caused so much harm throughout history? I mean, people have used the Bible to justify slavery, to oppress women, to persecute minorities. At what point do we acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, some of these ancient texts need to be reinterpreted for modern times?" The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators stopped their subtle movements. Everyone present could sense that something significant had just happened, though not everyone understood exactly what. Roumie sat perfectly still for a moment, his eyes never leaving Crockett's face, and those who knew him well would have recognized the look. It was the same expression he wore in The Chosen during the most pivotal spiritual moments. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the gentle actor discussing his craft. In its place was something that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, the authority of someone who had not just studied the scriptures but had lived them, breathed them, allowed them to transform every fiber of his being. "Congresswoman," he said, and the single word seemed to echo through the studio with more power than a shout. People have also used science to justify eugenics, politics to justify genocide, and progress to justify the destruction of everything sacred. The abuse of truth doesn't negate the truth itself. And when you suggest that God's word needs to be reinterpreted to match contemporary preferences, you're not showing wisdom, you're showing the same pride that has led to humanity's greatest disasters throughout history. Crockett's confident expression wavered. She had expected pushback, but not this level of spiritual intensity. Not this kind of moral authority that seemed to cut through all her carefully crafted arguments and reach something much deeper. For the first time in the interview, she looked uncertain, as if she was beginning to realize that she had walked into something far more dangerous than a political debate. But her pride wouldn't let her retreat. "That's a very convenient way to shut down discussion," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Just claim divine authority and refuse to engage with legitimate questions. But the reality is that your interpretation of Christianity has been used to justify discrimination, to deny people their basic human rights, to..." "Stop." The single word from Roumie cut through her sentence like a blade. He stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and powerful, and suddenly the entire dynamic of the room shifted. He was no longer a guest on her show, he had become something else entirely, a man standing in the full authority of his faith, uncompromising and unafraid. "You want to talk about discrimination?" he asked, his voice now carrying a prophetic weight that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. "You want to talk about denying people their basic rights? What about the right to truth? What about the right to salvation? What about the right to hear the gospel without having it filtered through political agendas and cultural manipulation?" The Congresswoman opened her mouth to respond, but something in his presence, something in the sheer spiritual authority radiating from him, made her hesitate. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what was becoming not just a confrontation, but a revelation, a moment when authentic faith met political power and refused to bow. What happens next will shock you to your core and completely change how you view the intersection of faith and politics in America. Make sure you stay until the very end and smash that subscribe button because this prophetic confrontation is about to reach its explosive climax that will leave everyone speechless. Jasmine Crockett made her fatal mistake. "You know what, Jonathan? Maybe it's time people stopped hiding behind ancient superstitions and started facing reality. Your Jesus may work for some people, but this is 2024. We need real solutions, not fairy tales." The words hit the studio like lightning. Roumie's eyes blazed with something beyond human anger. It was righteous fury, the same fire that once drove merchants from the temple. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of eternity itself. "Fairy tales?" he thundered, his presence now filling the entire studio. "Congresswoman, you stand before the living God right now, and you call his son a fairy tale? You think your political power, your earthly authority means anything compared to the one who holds your very breath in his hands?" Crockett tried to interrupt, but Roumie's voice rose like thunder. "You want real solutions? Here's reality, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Including yours. Including mine. Including every person watching this right now. That's not superstition, that's prophecy. That's promise. That's coming judgment." The Congresswoman's face went pale. "You can't threaten me on my own show." "This isn't a threat," Roumie declared, his words echoing with prophetic power. "This is a warning. You're leading people away from truth, away from salvation, away from the only hope they have. And God will hold you accountable for every soul you've deceived with your political gospel." The studio was electric with supernatural tension. Camera operators stepped back instinctively. Even the hardened production crew felt something they couldn't explain, the presence of divine authority in human form. What you're feeling right now, Roumie continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting, that conviction in your heart, that fear, that's the Holy Spirit speaking to you. This may be your last chance to hear him. Crockett sat frozen, speechless, completely outmatched by forces beyond her understanding. The political warrior had met eternal truth, and there was no contest. Jonathan Roumie reached down and removed his microphone with the deliberate precision of a man who had delivered his final message. The small device hit the studio floor with a sound that echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. "I came here to discuss art, storytelling, faith," he said, his voice now calm but carrying absolute finality. "Instead, I found someone determined to mock the God who gave her the very breath she's using to blaspheme him." He turned directly to the cameras, bypassing Crockett entirely. "To everyone watching, you just witnessed something profound. A choice between truth and politics, between eternal hope and temporal power. Choose wisely. Your soul depends on it." Crockett finally found her voice, desperate to regain control. "You can't just walk away. This is my show." Roumie paused at the studio door, looking back with something that might have been pity. "Congresswoman, this stopped being your show the moment you decided to challenge the King of Kings. You have a platform, influence, the power to lead people toward truth. Instead, you're leading them toward destruction. That blood will be on your hands, not mine." With that, he walked off the set with the same quiet dignity he had brought to portraying Jesus, uncompromising, unafraid, and absolutely certain of where his ultimate allegiance lay. Behind him, Jasmine Crockett sat alone at her interview desk, her political confidence shattered, her carefully constructed persona in ruins. The cameras captured every moment of her humiliation, the moment when earthly power met heavenly authority and lost decisively. The greatest spiritual confrontation in television history was over. And there was absolutely no question who had emerged victorious. So what do you think about Jonathan Roumie's prophetic stand against Jasmine Crockett's attack on Christianity? Did the Congresswoman get exactly what she deserved for trying to mock the faith that millions of Americans hold sacred? This wasn't just a television interview, this was a divine appointment, a moment when heaven itself stepped into a political studio and delivered judgment. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary: everything Roumie warned about is already happening. Since that confrontation aired, we've seen exactly the kind of spiritual awakening and political reckoning he predicted. People are choosing sides. Truth is separating from deception. And those who thought they could use their earthly power to diminish God's authority are discovering just how powerless they really are. This confrontation represents something much bigger than just one interview gone wrong. It's a preview of the ultimate battle between divine truth and human pride, between eternal values and temporal politics. Jonathan Roumie didn't just defend Christianity that day, he demonstrated what happens when authentic faith meets worldly opposition. He showed us that no political power, no matter how confident or well-funded, can stand against the truth of God's word. The question now is, which side of this battle are you on? Are you standing with those who believe in absolute truth, unchanging values, and divine authority? Or are you following those who think human wisdom can improve on God's perfect design? Because make no mistake, this confrontation was just the beginning. The real war between these worldviews is just getting started, and everyone will have to choose where they stand. If this incredible story of faith triumphing over politics inspired you, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment below telling me what you thought about Roumie's prophetic warning, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we're going to keep bringing you the most powerful stories of truth conquering deception in our modern world.